In a year filled with American turmoil and colored by bittersweet reflections on the work of David Lynch, there couldn't be a better time to read Mike Miley's brand new book, David Lynch's American Dreamscape: Music, Literature, Cinema, which takes a series of novel approaches to each of his films, as well as all seasons of Twin Peaks. We're going to be discussing this fascinating approach in general terms throughout this public discussion, with a deep dive into the various comparisons that Mike draws in the Patreon continuation, which is available immediately to anyone who joins the $5 a month tier on patreon.com/lostinthemovies. There was so much to dig into here. The first half of Mike's analysis connects Lynch works with literary companions. Eraserhead and Twin Peaks Firewalk with Me, the second film positioned as an answer to and revision of the first, are linked to the feminist visions of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper and Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. Blue Velvet's sinister yet childlike vision makes a vivid comparison to the thematic and formal complexities of Maurice Sendak's iconic illustrated book Where the Wild Things Are. The surreal Hollywood expose of Mulholland Drive is juxtaposed with Nathaniel West's fiction, and not just his most famous, Day of the Locusts. Finally, the atomic identities of Part 8 in Twin Peaks The Return and Cormac McCarthy's The Crossing rhyme with eerie resonance. The second half of David Lynch's American Dreamscape shifts to the field of music and broadens its scope from single works to anthologies, genres, even modes of listening. Wild at Heart's engagement with rock iconography, particularly Elvis's place as a nexus of country and blues, is explored. Perhaps my favorite chapter identifies the original Twin Peaks in particular as an audio-visual entry in the Teenage Tragedy song. Lost Highway is cleverly conceived of as a cover song by way of the actual cover songs featured on the soundtrack. The straight story is bracketed between the ostensibly unconscious folk, collected in the early 50s Anthology of American Folk Music, and the hyper-conscious, authentic pastiche of Bob Dylan's basement tapes. And Inland Empire is imagined as classic mixtape, assembling disparate pieces of Lynch's digital output into an eclectic but cohesive whole. Along the way, the films themselves are considered in compelling new lights, and the book ends by drawing its media threads together to discuss Lynch alongside both David Foster Wallace and Lana Del Rey. Before we get to it, here are some quick updates on my own work. It's been 8 months since the last bonus episode of Twin Peaks Conversations, which is the longest gap between discussions since this once-monthly series began in the fall of 2021. In that most recent episode, I talked with another author, this time one I'd spoken to many times before, John Thorne, who had recently published his book Devious Dreams about Mulholland Drive. In the time since then, I've stuck mostly to Patreon for my work. There I've previewed upcoming public work for the $1 a month tier, including the script and audio of narration for a future Journey Through Twin Peaks chapter, the last Twin Peaks character series entry outside of the top 10, illustrated companions for Season 2 of my Lost in Twin Peaks episode-by-episode podcast, and much more. I have also offered exclusive podcasts and essays for the $5 a month tier, with every other month's podcast topic chosen by patrons. These include Evil Does Not Exist, Penn Does Fen, Eve's Bayou, and Honora. In between those episodes, I wrote a viewing companion for every Season 2 episode of Breaking Bad, which I'm watching for the first time, and also a double review of The Rise of Skywalker and Solo, the only 2 Star Wars films I'd never discussed before. There's a conversation on the Star Wars series Andor that's forthcoming in a couple months as well. I also shared some reflections on the current state of different generations last December, as I do at the end of every year, part of a potential long-term project. And meanwhile, on the public site, I shared a couple public status updates, one kicking off the long final phase of 3 big Twin Peaks projects, and another commemorating my 2000th post on lostinthemovies.com. And sadly, in January, I had to honor David Lynch's passing with a written tribute, which I also read as a bonus podcast episode. And also, I made a guest appearance on the Obnoxious Anonymous podcast for a group discussion on Lynch and his legacy. Coincidentally, Mike Miley's book, David Lynch's American Dreamscape, was announced around the same time that Lynch passed away and published soon after. But just as his work on that began much, much earlier, our conversation begins even further back, with questions about when he first experienced the director's work. So let's get right into it. I'm here with Mike Miley. He's the author of David Lynch's American Dreamscape, Music, Literature, Cinema. I just wanted to get your own personal background on David Lynch, on Twin Peaks specifically. Where
Yeah.
did you come into his work? What was your entry point?
My entry point with Lynch, probably as with a lot of the things movies that I really like and love, was I got there way too young. And what I saw Dune in the theater when I was like 5 years old. And I remember like freaking out and leaving for a minute and coming back when the Baron like floats up in the air and
Hmm.
oozes and stuff. That creeped me out. I was like, I'm out, and I took off, and then eventually came back in. And then I guess probably I watched Dune a lot growing up. I really liked it, and I wound up probably in like sixth grade or something like that. Saw The Elephant Man on TV, so that would have been like 1990, 1991, or something like that. And then around that time, that's also when independent film and all of that is starting to blow up. And so I had gotten really into movies. And of course, you're you're getting into like Tarantino and Reservoir Dogs and things like that. You're going to hear people mention Blue Velvet when talking
Hmm.
about like the people he's aping from. And so somewhere in high school, I started getting into Lynch's films. I don't remember exactly when I first saw like Blue Velvet or Wild at Heart or things like that, but those were the ones that I was discovering on video. And then around that time, I'd heard about Twin Peaks, and I remember when I was growing up, when it was on originally, I remember hearing about it a lot. I remember the Who Killed Laura Palmer thing and it being like the Who Shot JR thing. And it kind of in my head, when I was like in sixth grade or whatever, got lumped into, oh, that's something that grown-ups are into. This, I remember being at a friend's sleepover, and we're like, oh, we're gonna go upstairs, my parents are gonna watch Twin Peaks, and like we're gonna go play or whatever,
Hmm.
right? And so I remember it being a thing, like event television kind of stuff, but I hadn't connected that it was the person who did Dune or the Elephant Man, and I hadn't really heard about it much beyond that. But then when I made those connections, Twin Peaks, along with Eraserhead, sort of became white whales in high school, where this is almost quaint now. The idea, oh, how am I going to watch this? There's a longer kind of funny story about how I wound up seeing Eraserhead for the first time that involved renting a VHS by mail. What I did for Twin Peaks was I think I had been able to rent the pilot or like that international version that was a single tape on VHS.
Hmm.
I had rented that and seen that, but then in my hometown, I grew up in Lafayette, Louisiana. They had, I think maybe one video store had like the first season on VHS, but like I also knew that wasn't the whole thing. But the Suncoast movie store in the mall had that like six tape
Yeah.
version of the first two seasons where it was like on the terrible EP speed tape, and it was like $100 or something. And junior year I saved up my money and I bought that, and then spent like a month, yeah, every moment that I wasn't doing something, that I was just watching Twin Peaks. Like I was eating breakfast and watching 10 minutes of the
Hmm.
show, each morning before school. So that was like junior year of high school. So that's like 95, 96 was when I wound up finally getting into Twin Peaks, and then immediately finding Fire Walk with Me. And I remember even and then like getting into the whole like, oh, there's this longer version of the movie,
Hmm.
and like going on like early internet and looking for the script, to try to read the parts that weren't there and stuff like that. So I was a little late to the party with some of it, but became obsessive about things about it very quickly.
Yeah, that's it. The 90s lore of Twin Peaks is so fascinating to me. The other thing that fascinates me is the newer people who can now sit down, they can watch pilot to part 18, which didn't even exist,
Uh-huh.
when I was getting into it, this the return,
Hmm.
and just take it all in on like a binge over a few days.
Yeah.
So it's like
Yeah.
these two extremes of viewership, and the people who watched it on TV as well, where they could see it, they could maybe tape it, but if they missed it, that was it. They were like not sure they'd ever see that episode.
This is definitely a rare thing. The hunt becomes more intense, and then this could cut both ways. The stakes become more intense because now I've spent months looking for this thing, and now I found it, and I really better like it, or I'm
Yeah.
going to be really upset.
One thing I wanted to get into, and we can use this as kind of a segue into the book a little,
Yeah.
because I think this film is the only one that has like two chapters where it's a significant presence. You know, you might bring up Blue Velvet in a Lost Highway chapter or something, but like Twin
Hmm.
Peaks Fire Walk with Me, you have a
Yeah.
chapter that's about that in Eraserhead, and then also a chapter that's about Twin Peaks as a whole, where that is like a major part of the analysis. So, what
Hmm.
was your first
Hmm.
experience with the film, and how did you kind of receive it in its, um, its place within that whole saga? And also, did that change over the years, or do you feel
Oh
still
yeah.
rooted in that first experience? Okay, yeah, let's
Oh
hear it.
no. Oh no. I mean, no, I had the stereotypical normie reaction of this isn't what this isn't coffee and cherry pie and this isn't the Twin Peaks I know. That's not Donna, like I had that sort of
Hmm.
stupid reaction. But even with that, there were things. I mean, we've all seen plenty of bad movies that we don't give another thought to, or see a movie we didn't like that we never think of again. And this one, even though at the time I was very disappointed because I mean, I had done the 90s equivalent of a binge watch, sort of
Hmm.
watching the whole thing in like a month and then going and getting the movie. And so it was a bit of a letdown because I was expecting one thing and it's delivering something else. And that's what I love about it now. But at the time, I was still very much immersed in a fandom of like, okay, give me more of the same, just better, or something like that. But even so, like there were these things that lingered in it for me where I was fascinated by the opening Deer Meadow Chris Isaac stuff. That stuff still stuck in my head years between seeing it. What always stuck in my head was the Deer Meadow part. That was always the part that I remembered the best. But just kept watching it and watching it and watching it. And then around the time of and then it's like my appreciation of is like this upward curve in this exponential growth into it, and then realizing as you're watching the return you realize how crucial and pivotal Firewalk with Me is to the everything that's going to be happening in the return. And from then forward, it's just grown in my esteem more, where I think it is probably the most significant movie. This is going to be a weird take, but just bear with me for a second. The most significant movie in Lynch's filmography, apart from Dune.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
I think there's like this. So the reason why I think Dune is pivotal is not necessarily because it's a because of the film itself, but more the circumstances around it. Most important being, or the two most important things being, Lynch deciding I would rather not do a movie again if I don't have Final Cut, which is going to sort of solidify what's going to come after. And then Dino De Laurentiis honoring the two picture deal to give
Hmm.
Lynch the space to make Blue Velvet, provided that it comes in under 2 hours and it stays under a certain budget. And if those two things don't happen, nothing afterward really happens, right? And then with Firewalk with Me, why it's so frequently mentioned in the book is the more that I think about that movie, the more I think it might be his best for one thing, but the other part is it's the other pivotal movie in his filmography in the way that it shifts his focus and his concerns for the rest of his career.
Hmm.
On the one hand, like I mentioned in the first time I talk about it in the Eraserhead chapter, I think it's really productive to view it as a kind of spiritual remake of Eraserhead. I mean, if you zoom out enough, the gist of the plots of both movies and what's happening to the protagonists in terms of the psychic trauma that they're enduring at the hands of domestic forces that they
Hmm.
don't really want, that invade their psyche, they're very similar in that regard. The difference is, of course, the gender of the protagonists changes. And so this performs a reset, I think, in Lynch's body of work, where if you look at everything after Firewalk with Me, uh, where he had been receiving criticism for his treatment of women in films and and things like that in the earlier work, particularly Wild at Heart and Blue Velvet, then afterward, you see most of the films have women as protagonists. And even in the case of Lost Highway or The Straight Story, where the men are protagonists, they are very different men. And the depiction of their masculinity is incredibly different from what you're looking at in Eraserhead and Blue Velvet, where in Lost Highway and The Straight Story, even though these characters subscribe to some of those more toxic views of masculinity, they are depicted as being thoroughly broken by it and beaten down or driven mad by their adherence to it. And so I think that all of that shift comes from his decision to return to the story of Laura Palmer, to really inhabit her psyche rather than simply using her as the image of this woman in trouble or this, woman filled with secrets, and all of that. In deciding to go deeper in there, he unlocks this whole other aspect of his artistic abilities and produces some of his most powerful work. And so I think that's something that doesn't really get it's getting discussed more with Firewalk
Hmm.
with Me, but that's definitely we're still in the early stages of that kind of assessment of the movie because everybody's now kind of catching up in the last 10 years or so, catching up to what he's doing in Firewalk
Yeah.
with Me, to where, I think everyone, including myself, who trashed that movie kind of owes him a personal apology, but yeah, so I think that's why the book needed to spend so much time talking about that movie, because if Twin Peaks is sort of at the center of the arc of his career, or if it's the hub really around which you can see everything else turning or meeting, then at the center of that center is Firewalk with Me.
Yeah, we're totally on the same page in terms of how you described it. Fire Walk with Me is kind of a spiritual remake in a weird way of Eraserhead,
Mhm.
and kind of a corrective as well.
Yeah,
So I was
exactly.
fascinated reading that chapter because um, I think that there are different ways of sort of seeing Lynch's filmography and analyzing it, and the best ones I get something from, even if I disagree with some of the delineations they make or the points of inflection, or if they see it more as a consistent through line. I tend to see it a little more, I think, like you do, as an evolution in some ways.
Hmm.
Like he's
Hmm.
working through and developing and enriching. As great as I mean, Eraserhead is a masterpiece, but even
Hmm.
so, I feel like there's more richness and depth and messiness too. Honestly, it's a messier movie. I did a video that I'll link in the show notes for
Hmm.
people watching this, where I assembled the clips of Eraserhead and Firewalk with Me and a rhythmic back and forth between them.
Oh.
In Lynch's films leading up to Firewalk with Me, there is a development and growth that
Hmm.
reaches its like fruition at that point in that film with Laura Palmer and his empathy for that character and everything, the sort of the shift in the point of view, the fleshing out of it. And it's funny because in some ways, although there are the parallels between Henry and Laura as the protagonists, and the contrasts as well, at certain points in this video and certain points in how I see it, I almost see her as like, what if we gave the Eraserhead baby a voice,
Oh, okay.
in
Uh-huh.
that sense
Uh-huh.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And various other characters as well. I mean, the woman across the hall, if Henry is more of like a Leland figure, it's like his
Hmm.
daughter is in his eyes is a combination of all these archetypes, and he kind of
Hmm.
forces that fragmented viewpoint upon her, and she has to grapple with it. So
Mm.
that film to me is the crown jewel of Lynch's work in so many
Yeah.
ways.
Yeah.
So let's get
Yeah.
into your specific book and
Yeah.
the kind of structure of it and the themes that you're exploring. What was the genesis of the idea for this? Did it develop out of maybe discrete essays and things like that, or did you kind of come to it fully formed, like I want this to be a book where I'm going to go through his whole work in this manner?
Oh, no, it was definitely the former, starting
Hmm.
off as the Wild at Heart chapter is the first thing I wrote as a conference paper and a journal article in like 2014.
Oh, okay.
And then a few years later, I did the Lost Highway chapter, and the or in between, I kind of worked on a section of the conclusion that talks about Lynch and David Foster Wallace.
Hmm.
And then when I started working on the Twin Peaks, The Return, and Cormac McCarthy chapter, I sort of realized, wait a second, if I finish this thing, I'm going to have like a quarter to a
Yeah.
third of a book's worth of stuff about David Lynch written, and I'm kind of doing the same things or a similar approach with all of these. So, like, maybe is there some sort of bigger thing here? And I think that doing then trying to put together a proposal and map out what the rest of the book would look
Hmm.
like, it allowed me to talk about some things that I had kind of been thinking about with these other movies, but hadn't really explored deeper than oh, like Eraserhead's kind of like the bell jar or the yellow wallpaper, like just a kind of stray thought that I was like, oh, maybe there's something there, but like somebody's probably thought of that. It's okay. And not really jumping into it that much beyond that. But what it did and what I like about the process of doing it that way versus having something fully formed is that I don't think I really understood how everything fit together until I was basically almost done with the whole thing. And that at the beginning, I needed to add something to the beginning of the conclusion that's, oh, can I sort of summarize what I've been doing in a paragraph or two? And I was like, I don't know. And then I just sat down and it's like, oh wow, I just articulated that and that makes sense. And so I think the process of putting all of it together and exploring each thing individually then allowed me to take a step back and try to put into words what I feel like his larger project is, or at least
Mhm.
what the book wants people to see his larger project as potentially being. Um, and so that part was kind of fun, but it grew out of a few different weird things where it's doing these individual chapters and making some connections there. I can't remember if I came up with the title first or with that little concluding paragraph, but those two pieces helped to kind of make the whole thing make a little more sense, even to me. I knew I didn't want to do every movie because I just didn't think I had very much interesting stuff to say about Dune or the Elephant Man,
Which
but
is funny because
also,
those were the first two you saw, right?
right? Yeah. And I thought just, oh, well, they have such clear and obvious works that they're based on. I
Hmm.
mean, even though Wild at Heart is also based on a novel, it's populated with so much other stuff that is not in the book that Lynch is bringing into
Yeah.
it. So if I feel like there's a little more going on there beyond just the adaptation. Yeah, and then they're not set in America, and that was my easy like,
Right.
oh, okay, cool. Like this is gonna be an American studies book. So now there's my clear explanation for, well, sorry, they don't like they're disqualified, you know.
Yeah. There are a couple things with that. One
Yeah.
is that's interesting to sort of hear you say one of your concerns was with the source material that, these were based on. It does feel like throughout this, I would say would it be fair to say it's more of a narrative analysis of the works than a formal one? I know there is some discussion of the style and the
Hmm.
formal aspects in it, but it feels like your concern is more with the stories he's telling, the characters he's exploring, the themes within those stories. Is that fair to say?
I guess so. I mean, I think it depends. I don't. Like you noted, I try to ground a lot of the narrative stuff like in some kind of formal analysis. So I've
Yes,
got to
yeah,
be
I
able to
thought
break
so.
down it. I got to be able to break it down in some scenes to support
And
that.
especially with like Inland Empire, where the texture is so much a part of the
Yeah,
analysis.
yeah,
I certainly noticed it there.
yeah. But I mean, I think the formal analysis is there to support the narrative analysis.
Hmm.
Yeah. So the narrative part is definitely the primary, and the formal is the evidence.
And then the other interesting aspect of what you just said was that this was going to be an American studies book. Like that was
Hmm.
going to kind of be an organizing principle with it. Um, I thought it was interesting going in. I think you did a YouTube trailer for this book,
Oh yeah.
which everyone should check out. It's a cool, I love the idea of a visual teaser for a book. I'm not
Oh
sure I've
yeah.
seen that much before, honestly.
Yeah, they
Maybe I'm
definitely don't do
just
very many
oblivious,
for.
but
I
yeah,
mean, I guess they do sometimes I think authors
yeah,
of like fiction and nonfiction trade books have to do them,
yeah.
but for an academic book, it's pretty
Did they
rare.
like
But I was,
hire actors or something to perform the characters for like little snippets? Because that's kind of
yeah,
fascinating.
can I confess I don't think I've ever watched a book trailer
Now I want
before.
to.
So I don't know
Yeah.
I actually don't know what they look like. I have
So
no clue.
when I saw that trailer, I was thinking, okay, so this will be more of like a sort of a broad view of Lynch's like specifically how he looks at America. And what I found when
Hmm.
I read it is I almost feel like that's more of a subtext. The
Mm-hmm.
American, it's because it's more about these different genres or approaches to music or specific books. And the thread between them all, or one of the threads between the films and the works that you choose, is they're all, I think, all American authors where it's a
Hmm.
specific or specifically like American kind of genres
Hmm.
and set in America if they're telling a story, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought that was interesting. That was what was it about the American studies aspect of it? that like was that something you realized as you were putting it together? Like, oh, this is the through there's a through line of Americana in this.
I think it's more just the association of, you know, as much as people like to amp up that like Lynch is somehow from Weirdsville, right, or from
Right.
somewhere else, right, is like removed from our reality. I think that the more interesting thing about it is, well, no, he's firmly rooted and
Mm,
thoroughly entrenched in everything of mid-century or post-war, the post-war American spirit. Like
mm,
that is, if I think if you really want to get a sense of what the United States post 1945 is like emotionally, spiritually, ideologically, David Lynch is probably the best person to take you there, even though he may not seem like he is overtly preoccupied with those things. Some of it is but I think that's what makes it so great, right? Is that some of it is entirely unconscious, not in the sense of not being deliberate, but just in the sense that one of his major gifts as an artist is not just having maybe uh, supreme access to his unconscious, but also an intense trust in those unconscious or subconscious impulses, or maybe to put it a different way, a complete, when he's creating at least, a complete lack of a filter as
mm,
far as to screen out like, oh, that's dumb, or oh, that's not going to work, or what, you know, the a lack of self-consciousness that allows him to just trust in the power of these ideas or images and then present them more or less uh, uncut from the subconscious, where other filmmakers are much more cautious and self-conscious about those sorts of things. And so as a result, we get something that maybe feels weirder or more disturbing, but I think is probably more honest and accurate to the the American psyche than other stuff that might get touted as being distinctly American.
mm. And it also gives you an opportunity, I feel like, to incorporate the straight story alongside some of the
Mm,
more far out works, which I feel like if people I've seen, approaches to Lynch's work where they'll leave out maybe three works and it'll be Dune, Elephant Man, and Straight Story.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
like that this gives you an opportunity to at least slot Straight Story in there as well.
Yeah, and I wasn't initially going to,
Oh,
and then
interesting.
I did
Okay.
because I didn't have that was the last
Yeah.
one that I came up with.
I was
Not the
just
last one
gonna
I
ask you
wrote, but
that.
like, yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't the last thing that I wrote, but it was the last chapter that I added to the proposal. But then because I thought, oh well, like I was trying to figure out what I would talk about with it, and then I thought, well, it's definitely engaging in a folk music tradition, and
Mm,
so let me explore that. And I'm glad that I did, because I think that, kind of like Firewalk with Me, or the Straight Story, is the underappreciated one that we're just sort of starting to appreciate and figure out. And
mm,
10 years from now, I think that movie is going to be much higher in people's esteem and rankings, I guess, as far as what Lynch's great work is. And because it's still trying to claw its way out from that
mhm.
outlier status, the G-rated Disney, etc. stuff. And what I think is fascinating is all the outlier things about it are some of the more superficial things about it. It's easy to see, oh, this one clearly doesn't fit, but then if you watch it and like you think about it and look at it, it fits very much, right?
Mm,
It's the comparison that I came up with, talking like the quick one-liner version is like, well, the Straight Story is just Blue Velvet, but instead of going into the ground to see the dark and ugly, the dark and ugly just comes out, right?
mm.
Like you don't we don't have to dig under the ground to get to that trauma. It's present. It's there. It'll come up out of the ground and catch you, right? And the Straight
Yeah.
Story is very much about that. So like it's a bright movie, but that brightness is in some ways just shows us how dark some of this stuff really is.
So that's interesting that that was the last one you came up with. I was going to
Hmm.
ask you what was the first one after you realized it was going to be a book. So you mentioned, you'd
Oh,
already
right.
got Part 8, you'd already got Wild at Heart
Yeah,
and
yeah,
Lost
yeah.
Highway. Like what was the first one
Um,
where it was intended for a book?
yeah, I think it was either the Nathaniel West stuff with Mulholland Drive, or the Inland Empire mixtape kind of
Interesting.
stuff.
Hmm.
Not necessarily when I wrote them, because I think the Inland Empire thing was one of the last ones that I did.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did the proposal, and then I went right into working on the Mulholland Drive chapter after the proposal.
And I guess because you had a couple that were on broader musical themes, and then you had
Hmm.
one that was with a novel from the
Hmm.
inception, you had this idea of like first half will be literary and with very specific works, and second half will be
Hmm.
musical with not
Yeah.
connections to specific albums or I guess other than the folk anthology, but more of like a
Hmm.
broad, almost like spiritual connection to the type of music or the
Yeah.
listening experience in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. So that, yeah, that seemed pretty early on, like, okay, I'm gonna split these up because and I liked the idea of doing something that heavily focused on literature because people don't talk about David Lynch in literary terms very much. And people will write about him engaging with certain literary traditions, but there's some stuff that you'll read about Lynch where people almost talk about him like he can't read, or like that he's never read a book before or something like
Mm.
that. It's like he's written most of his scripts. Like the guy is a writer, right? The guy has a literary sensibility, and but usually when people talk about him, it's the quick Kafka reference or the quick mention of some other writer. And I wanted to say, well, if we're going to make these quick offhanded comparisons to these literary figures, someone should investigate why those quick references are true and accurate, and actually dig down and see how much we can get out of this beyond a mere offhanded connection.
At what point in that process did you realize you wanted to amplify the David Foster Wallace analysis comparison with Lynch with Lana Del Rey as well? Was it when you
Yeah.
knew that you were going to do music and literature as kind of the dual approaches there?
Yeah, because I mean I had a version of the Wallace thing already kind of
Yeah,
worked out. And then I had thought for a while that I was going to talk about Trent Reznor instead of Lana Del
mm,
Rey.
interesting.
But then I was like, I mean I mean obviously they've worked together. This is not like it wasn't like it's not a completely novel sort of distinction. And then my wife had mentioned to me, I guess there was maybe the New York Times did some sort of piece that had on Lana Del Rey that had like a mention of Lynch in it. And then I'm like, okay, I hadn't really listened to a lot of Lana Del Rey,
Hmm.
so I'm gonna check this out. And then I got obsessed
Mm,
and was like, oh, damn, this is so thoroughly Lynchian and uh, sort of engaging with and extending his themes and ideas that this is the thing I'm most excited to work on and do.
mm.
And so yeah, so that stuff kind of came together pretty. I mean, like the Wallace thing was sort of already in place, and I think that's been an old saw, I guess, for me in working on a lot of previous work I'd done was on David Foster Wallace's work, and that was kind of in the same way that in this book I'm like, hey guys, Lynch is literary too. The thing that I would often kind of say in Wallace circles was an art just because someone's a writer doesn't mean their influences are only writers.
Hmm.
Like artists take in all kinds of media. It's not just like because you're a musician you don't go to the movies.
Hmm.
um and I so that I wanted to do that kind of cross medium look to see how, because then it's making a broader argument about what it's like for us to be alive now. Like we take in all sorts of media and it all impacts us in some way. And I think it's interesting to look at how writers do that. And plus, in Wallace's case, it felt like a very underappreciated statement that he makes in his essay about David Lynch was that Blue Velvet changed the way he saw the world. I mean, like you can't get much more blatant in a statement of impact than that, right, for an artist. But not a lot of people had really explored how thoroughly his fiction is aping a lot of Lynch's signature styles and concerns. Once I knew that the book was going to be divided into these two parts, the conclusion was then going to have to be, okay, if we're gonna if we're gonna make this about Lynch taking in all these other things from other places, then the ending should be about how other people take that and spread it back out. It's a full cycle or
Mm,
process of
that's a great
taking
point.
something
Yeah.
in, digesting it, and transforming it, and then putting it back out to get received by other people. And then, Wallace and Lana Del Rey are genre defining figures, or sorry, medium defining figures in their respective art forms. So other people, I mean, certainly other writers are picking up things from David Foster Wallace, and pop stars are going to pick up things from Lana Del Rey. And so it becomes this ongoing thing of transformation and influence and inspiration that I think that's the endlessly fascinating part about getting into any kind of uh, art, or or
Hmm.
music or whatever, is just seeing how people take what came before them and what they respond to and put their own stamp on it, and then expand the boundaries of what these art forms can do.
So the fact that you mentioned actually getting into Lana Del Rey
Hmm.
through this work
Yeah.
adds another interesting dimension to what was going to be my next question. So I'll just
Okay.
include it there, which was, did any of your opinions or impressions of Lynch's work, individually or collectively, change in some fundamental way due to this project, or did you mostly
Mm.
find yourself extending what you already understood and appreciated? And I would add to that, and also for the works or the genres or the mediums that you discuss in the book as well, in comparison to him,
Yeah. That's a good
besides
question.
Lana Del Rey.
Right, right. I think that I mean, it's certainly doing all this has certainly deepened and broadened my appreciation and love for Firewalk with Me and The Straight Story. And in doing, I've had to kind of admit some of Eraserhead's flaws, I guess, in terms of its worldview. I still, it's the kind of thing where like now I understand how and why it's got some of these flaws, but it's still a very important movie to me that I still really love, and I'm gonna keep watching and things like that. And then other cases, like maybe like with Inland Empire, I was able to get back to and articulate the feelings that I had the first time I saw the movie. And then with regards to some of the music and things like that, I mean, the the teen tragedy ballad, I think, is just
Mm.
something that I've always liked those things, but man, I just realized how much. And this is all sort of like all this kind of made me like late 50s, early 60s
Mm.
pop and R&B music a lot more. I mean, I live in New Orleans. There's a radio show here that every Wednesday night someone plays song music like that for 3 hours, and that's great stuff. Because I mean, a lot of these artists, they put out like 5 songs.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of hard to, you can't go out and like buy albums for all of them. And so they're just these little things that you kind of just have to pick up on the radio and, appreciate them while you hear them. But it's hard to track down the actual people who
Yeah.
made them and their work, because it's some little local label that put out a couple of songs or something and then it folded. But that kind of stuff, I think it put me back in touch with what's so great
Yeah.
about those, because I think Lynch understands
Hmm.
what makes those things so great, the kind of the simplicity of them, but like the simplicity of what the things that they're saying and the song structures and things like that, but the complexity of the longing and
Mm.
the depth of feeling that they are able to express through that simplified form. That's the part that I find endlessly fascinating and really profound.
I think that was my favorite chapter. And I
Oh,
think
thanks.
it
Yeah.
really tapped into something that it's almost easy to, I don't want to say easy to forget, but like after you go through all of Twin Peaks and Fire Walk with Me and The Return, I think that analysis brings you back to what it is that pulls a lot of people into Twin Peaks in the first place. And
Mm.
I think definitely pulled David Lynch in the first place,
Hmm.
of like
Hmm.
Laura Palmer as this almost mythic lost teen icon, and that in that sense. But then what it does that a 3 minute song can't necessarily do, or maybe isn't interested in doing, maybe it's more interested in capturing one part of that phenomenon, is
Hmm.
go in fully and like humanize and understand her, from the other side. And so,
Yeah.
like, the fact that it starts with this kind of almost mythic, like American, and I love to, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves because I have,
No, it's fine.
sections here with the different parts of the book where I wanted to get into each thing. But I want to
Uh-huh.
mention at the outset, I loved the framework. Like, I'm also obsessed with generations and eras and sort of the
Mm,
delineations between them. I love that you positioned this 1955 to 1963 period
mm,
as this era of the teen tragedy ballad, and connected it with all of these major figures, often a little bit old, certainly not teenagers, but
mm-hmm,
youthful figures who died in that era: James Dean, Marilyn
mm,
Monroe, and then
mm-hmm.
climaxing with JFK.
Yeah,
It's like he
yeah,
was the he was the apotheosis of the teen tragedy ballad
yeah.
era, and it's like, wow, that just really resonates. And the fact that that's such a significant thing for Lynch as well, comes up in his work. He did that screenplay with Mark Frost, which was about both Marilyn Monroe and
Oh, right,
JFK's death. So yeah, I
right.
just really tapped into something there that was very resonant, I thought.
Yeah, and I guess some of it is it's the most boomer thing of all time, like a lot
Oh
of this
sure,
stuff.
yeah.
But I think particularly in, I mean, it is boomer nostalgia, right? It is the whole like the day the music died, the loss of innocence, the American Pie, like all of that kind of stuff. It is all of that, and
Mm,
that has become a cliche. And Lynch plays with cliches all the time to underscore the fact that these things are cliches because they're expressing some deep psychic truth.
hmm
And he has to sort of defamiliarize us with those cliches in order to get back to the root of what manifested that cliche in the first place, which in the case of what we're talking about here is like deep psychic generational trauma, right? Like trauma on a national scale that people are still trying to process, like this, the nostalgia that we see in American life for the 50s. And I want to put that in like air quotes, like whatever
hmm
that means, right? The white middle class conception of the 50s,
hmm
in that is lionized and talked about as some sort of thing that we want to return to or whatever, the nuclear family and all of that kind of stuff. Lynch's work is able to simultaneously present that nostalgia as a beautiful thing,
hmm
right? This beautiful dream, but also show us the really horrible things that that dream was dreamt to cover up.
hmm Yeah.
And
Well
the
put.
interplay between those things is what makes these movies so disturbing, is because we are participating in a dream that we all have either believe in or have been conditioned to accept as desirable. And then, and like, I mean, this is what Mulholland Drive, I think, is getting at in its own way about Hollywood, right? Is that we fall into this dream because it is like we want it. It is our dream. And then we have to face the fact that that dream is unsustainable, that it can't cover up all the things we're trying to cover up. And then we're going to be faced with the ugly, horrifying things that that dream was meant to cover up. And then we have to choose whether we're going to retreat into that dream
hmm
and just try to stay there forever, the way that the town of Twin Peaks keeps trying to, or the way that that Henry does at the end of Eraserhead or something like that, or if we're going to like Sailor and Lula or like at the end of Inland Empire
hmm
or The Straight Story, or whether we're going to like, confront that reality, kind of and reject living in that dream and kind of face reality for what it is, and be healed in doing so. Like I think that's kind of the
Yeah.
overarching thing that he's getting at. But like again, Twin Peaks is the center of all of that. Like Twin Peaks is the primo expression of this dynamic,
Yeah.
and each iteration of it unpacks it and investigates it in a different way
And
and in a deeper way.
and I think the crucible where he himself discovers some of that,
Yeah,
you
that's a good
know,
point.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
especially when you extend it into Firewalk with Me as well. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
One thing that's funny to me too about what you just said about this is the boomer mythos. In many ways, it's like a cliche we're all very used to. I think what you kind of tap into in this, and what I think Lynch's work taps into, is the fact. I think what's most interesting about this as the boomer mythos, and again, this is maybe parsing with like a fine tooth comb, but I love doing this stuff. Technically, if you want to get into it, like it's more the younger silent generation. The people who
Mm,
like
hmm.
maybe could remember World War II were already like in their 20s. Like they're the ones performing this music. They're certainly
Hmm.
they or even the next generation up, the greatest
Hmm.
generation, if you want to call it, are the ones dying like Marilyn Monroe and
Hmm.
JFK and all that. So it's like this boomer mythos where they're in like almost the childlike point of view, looking up at this adult world with
Yeah.
its ideals and then also these dark fissures in it. And I
Hmm.
think at his best, what Lynch's work captures is that kind of like precocious child's perspective
Yeah.
on that older world. And so it's just interesting
Yeah.
to me the
Yeah.
extent to which this was all stuff that the boomers were digesting kind of from above in a way,
Hmm.
from the
Hmm.
people slightly older or even their parents' generation and trying to make sense of it. And then
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know. That
Yeah.
just that struck me as well.
No, I like that because I mean, what he was born in 1946,
Yeah,
right?
he's
So
like the
I mean,
oldest, like by like 20 days, like the oldest boomer, like he's
right.
right at the
Yeah.
cusp of that.
Yeah, so I mean that makes a lot of sense, I think, because then you have that sort of, I mean, I'm saying this as someone who's born in 79, so like I'm
Yeah, right.
barely a
Yeah,
Gen Xer,
you
right?
got the same thing with the on the slightly the other side with Gen X.
Yeah, right. And so of course, like I'm obsessed with and always have been really in like looked up to the Gen X stuff because yeah,
Hmm.
those are the and so I can see what you're saying there, and that makes a lot of sense in the way that this he's more or less being raised in
Mm.
the time when all these myths are being created.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
we act like they're these sort of timeless things that were always around, but so much of it is like, no, this really was only true for like an 8 year period,
Yeah,
you know, like
exactly.
that notion of the nuclear family or whatever. And it's like
Yeah,
you're talking about like 8 years in the 50s, and you
yeah.
know that that is sort of held up to be like the norm. And it's like really historically, that was the weird blip.
Hmm.
You know, but now we sort of act like that is now and always has been the norm. And so, yeah, he's right there at like ground zero for all of that stuff. And yeah, I mean, and so in that respect, he was living in a dream, right? He was
Yeah.
growing up in a dream, like the whole country was. That, yeah, like maybe the events of 1963 or other eras, like, you know, you can pick whichever kind of one are the tremors that are like waking people up from this dream and continually Americans have to choose, even still have to choose, are you gonna wake up or are you gonna keep trying to live in this dream and tell yourself it's real?
So if you could pick one, or maybe I'll be generous, say two or three, what was the most fruitful comparison for you of all of these?
Oh,
Which
ooh,
yielded the most unexpected results? Not necessarily the same
yeah.
question.
I'm really happy with or thrilled by the talking about cover songs in Lost Highway just
Mm,
because that felt like, oh wow, I found something that has been right there the whole time that nobody's noticed, right? Like that felt kind of cool.
yeah, because there's
Um,
three. Just because I'm not going
yeah,
to lay this part out with the in the intro, but there's
yeah,
three cover songs I think in the
hmm,
film, and they're all at like huge dramatic inflection points in the
yeah,
movie, and it kind of
yeah,
mirrors the theme of the actor or the character covering another character in the movie itself,
yeah,
yeah, or
yeah,
characters.
yeah. That just felt like, oh wow, this is, and the covers all like switch what genre of
Hmm.
song it is. You know, like it's the whole thing. It's like, oh wow, Pete is a cover of Fred. Like that's, you
Hmm.
know, trying to do the same thing that every musician does. And let's remember, Fred's a musician in the movie,
Hmm.
right? They're trying to do what every musician does when they cover a well-known song. It's like, this is how I'm going to put my stamp. This is how I'm going to establish myself, right? It's not about, I mean, it's not always about serving the song. It's about, you know, lifting up the artist doing the cover. Like, look at what we can do. So I think like that one I really enjoyed. And then I mean just the endless I liked how thoroughly Nathaniel West's work and Mulholland Drive are talking to each other. People make the comparison, oh, Mulholland Drive is like Lynch's Day of the Locust, and like kind of leave it at that. But then looking at all four of West's novels and seeing kind of what his overall project was and what Mulholland Drive is up to, I felt like, oh, this is super duper fruitful, to illustrate what's going on in both on both ends, right? Like it was I felt like that mutually reinforced West's work and Lynch's work.
Hmm. One of the sort of genres that you discuss in terms of literature is the hysterical texts, which is
Oh yeah.
what you call the sort of these novels about usually a female protagonist kind. Although there's some, I think some male ones as well that you observe where they're like going through a kind of a crisis and how it's kind of seen by society versus what they're experiencing and all of that.
Hmm. Hmm.
I was kind of intrigued. I don't think you draw this connection in the book itself, but what is the relation or the tension that you see between the teen tragedy song and the hysterical text? Do you think there's a link
Oh.
there as well?
Oh, that's interesting. Uh, hmm. Maybe I haven't really thought about that. Maybe in the sense of how people in the way that teen tragedy songs are
Hmm.
dismissed as sentimental,
Yeah.
sappy, and I mean, they're feminized,
Hmm.
basically, right? And maudlin and mawkish and things like that. That's a similar response that the emotions that the women in a hysterical text are subjected to. That's the reaction they get as well, right? Is
Hmm.
that, oh, you're getting carried away again. You need to lie down, or
Hmm.
something like
Right.
that. Like you need to be confined to a bed for 6 months until we know what to do with you. That's sort of, I think there's something similar there in the suspicion that maybe the more patriarchal culture has for like genuine emotion
Hmm.
and genuine non-aggressive feeling. Uh, so that I think that could be a way that they are in dialogue with each other.
Hmm. Well, and of course, it's I don't think I even wrote that question with this in mind, but those two comparisons both come up in chapters focused on Firewalk with me, and it's kind
Right.
of
Yeah.
reminiscent how. So you read some of the critics at the time, and it's genuinely shocking how dismissive they are of Laura and even the performance and everything. And oh, this is
Yeah.
just overwrought nonsense. What is this? And they like kind of brush it off. So yeah, no,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm.
makes sense. That there's
Mm-hmm.
almost like Firewalk with Me is a missing link between those those two
Yeah.
forms.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, because yeah, the whole like she's just like screaming and crying the whole time or
Right.
whatever. And
Well,
it's
like
like,
what would you do in that
yeah,
situation? I mean,
yeah,
come
exactly.
on.
How should she behave?
Right.
Could you please tell me that? And it's I mean, it's in some ways a culture, or I don't want to necessarily fault the individuals per se, but like without like specific ones to look at, but like it's a culture telling on themselves,
Hmm.
right? It's like, oh, this like man, she's like too much, and it's like, oh, you prefer the picture behind in the trophy case,
Right. And
right?
David
That's
Foster
how you,
Wallace kind of gets
yeah,
to that in that
yeah,
essay in the David Lynch loses his head. It's like as soon
yeah.
as it started to be maybe it's not she's not the one to blame for the reason, people lost interest and put it away and dismissed it or whatever.
Yeah,
It's
right. So wait, you
fascinating.
mean I can't fantasize about her as like the idealized, pedestal queen and the sexually available, woman. I can't have that fantasy anymore. I got to see how like icky that all of those fantasies are. Oh, okay, I'm out, right? Like yeah, yeah, it's very revealing, right?
Well, I think another author who digs into that, who you talk about in the book, and actually
Mhm.
this was something I was curious about. Um, Grail Marcus has an
Yeah.
essay in Shape of Things to Come where he talks about
Uh-huh.
Cheryl Lee and her performance as Laura and the heights that it goes to and compares it to silent movie acting. So I was interested in the
Hmm.
book. You talk about Grail Marcus, but more in terms of um, is it Lipstick Traces or some of his earlier
No, it's from
collections?
the stuff from Mystery Train,
Mystery
and
Train,
then
okay.
his work on the old Weird America, his work on the basement tapes and
So
the Harry Smith anthology.
when you were writing this, did you visit or revisit his that collection, Shape of Things to Come, or was that not really in the?
Yeah, I looked at it. I mean, I do have a copy of it,
Yeah,
and yeah, because he writes about Lost Highway in that book
yeah,
as
because
well, I
it's
think, right?
interesting. It's like specifically Lynch, but you try not to go as much for the obvious comparison. Like you brought
Oh,
him in
right.
kind of sideways with the musical stuff. Was that a conscious
Yeah.
decision, or just you felt sort of you were going for different things with the analysis?
Uh, a little bit of both.
Hmm.
I think on the one hand, and something Marcus's stock, I guess, in like super academic circles isn't particularly high.
Hmm.
And so I was maybe dealing with some of that where it's like, okay, two, like one, it's like having, I'm in some ways like I'm pushing it, having him like as a big figure in like two chapters, right? Like
Hmm.
it's like I'm like in terms of being like a little too. I mean, I'm a big Marcus fan. Like
Yeah.
I think Marcus is great. Even when I'm not entirely sure what he's talking about, I'm like, oh man, these
Oh yeah,
sentences,
that's
right?
a common sensation.
Right. I mean, like the later stuff, like his late style. I think it's like, oh man, you're cooking. I don't know what you're cooking, but it's going. But then yeah, and I mean I did read some of that stuff and I felt like yeah, one, I was just maybe like it was gonna be too much Greal in the thing, but then also it yeah, it I guess didn't click for me as strongly as some of the other stuff that I
Interesting.
had wanted to do. Um yeah, so that was kind of where I went with it.
I wanted to ask one very big question, so take your time
Okay.
with it. Um, and this is partly inspired by the fact that you have this kind of backdrop and this subtext of America, Americana, American history throughout the book, but you're focusing on these specific aspects of it. In your mind, what is the nature of the American dreamscape, the particular material qualities that underpin and motivate the illusion? And I guess with that established, what, if anything, is the antidote to that?
Most succinctly put, his articulation of that dreamscape is probably just the opening to Blue Velvet, right
Hmm.
before we go under the ground. But it is that, the Leave It to Beaver, like white picket fence, but also I guess just that sense of like comfort, ease, great neighbors, everyone knows everybody, like where the yellow light means slow down instead of speed up. Like I think those are the of a nation triumphant and secure in its place in the world. Um, and the the antidote to that starts, I guess, with a recognition, maybe number one, that that is a concocted, constructed fantasy, but number two, that that fantasy or that position was secured via extremely horrific acts, right? Whether that's like the
Hmm.
atomic bomb or or on the domestic angle, because that's kind of he's playing the national and the domestic against each other, uh, patriarchal oppression, recognizing that these are the forces that this fantasy is being used to prop up, and the antidote to it beyond just recognizing that stuff. Because I don't know, like that's the thing that's fascinating about Lynch's work is he doesn't really want to get rid of the dream, entirely because he appreciates its beauty and thinks it's a gorgeous thing. And oh, wouldn't it be nice if this were true? And I guess it goes with the dualities and the binaries that
Hmm.
he always kind of plays with. Being aware of that and existing in that tension, that this is where we live, Shelley,
Right. Yeah.
is that's the world that we're in. And then I guess Inland Empire maybe offers the closest thing to the antidote, which is like the kind of the
Mm.
radical empathy of creating something for somebody else.
Mm. Yeah.
Right. That's going to like he's not laying out any kind of national program that is going to resolve all of this stuff. It's going to be resolved in one person reaching out for someone else, not in the way, but in the Inland Empire way, not in the episode 17 of The Return
Hmm.
reaching out for somebody, right? It's not going to be reaching out to try to undo the mistakes of the past because that's just a whole different, that's just another fantasy, right? That you can somehow
Yeah.
go back and fix things. That's a false, that's the fantasy antidote. The real antidote is being present now and reaching out to someone now, going forward, not backward.
And it's interesting too that I feel like when you say that, it brings something to mind, which I'm not sure. Like I thought about it, but not. I don't know that I ever thought about it in comparison with Inland Empire. I think you can make a number of things out of it, but Cooper's flaw in part 17 to me, part of it is the same flaw you could see in the season 2 finale, which I think Martha
Mm.
Nachemson identifies really well
Hmm.
as this sort of willful pushing through um, with this sort of like mentality of like, I am, kind of rationally attempting to do this rescue operation or something like that
Hmm. Hmm.
versus a more inward, intuitive process that, she
Hmm.
sees exemplified more in the first Red Room Dream versus his visit at the end of the series. And there's all kind of meta behind the scenes reasons for that as well, which is part of what I love about Twin Peaks. You're always dealing with things that are being imposed on the creator as well as things the creator is coming up with beforehand and in response to those impositions. But
Yeah.
it's interesting to think like that's Cooper's flaw. And whereas Nikki in Inland Empire, who was able to reach Lost Girl at the end, it's largely through dealing with what are presented to her, what she experiences as her own problems, either her
Hmm.
personally or her character that she's playing. And
Hmm.
only after that process is she able to find this lost girl and embrace her and fuse with her in that way. Like there's this sense that you don't make a decision of, I'm going to reach out and take Laura Palmer's hand out in the woods and pull her away from her fate. Instead, you experience something and you discover that empathy through that like creative process, which I think for
Hmm.
Lynch is the film Fire Walk with Me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I've struggled somewhat with The Return as a part of Twin Peaks, not so much on its own thing, which I love, but like where does this fit into the narrative? Because for me, it kind of
Hmm.
ends with Fire Walk with Me in a way,
Mm.
if not chronologically, then kind of spiritually maybe or something like
Uh-huh.
that with the
Uh-huh.
end of that movie. And I think what I've mostly been able to come up with Return is a postscript pointing us back to Fire Walk with Me by
Yeah.
contrast in some way. So, anyways,
Yeah.
that's my kind of rambling about it. But I
No, I
love
love
that.
that.
Well, I
Yeah.
love that Inland Empire point about how Nikki and us as the audience and Lynch as the creator is able to transcend and through that creative
Hmm.
process. Not that there's not a place for rationalism and analysis and all of that, but understanding that kind of spiritual creative process. So I love that.
Yeah, when
Um,
I think, yeah, and to add to some of that, because I love what you're saying, and in the way too, like, yeah, and also in Inland Empire, she sits in that hotel room with all those women and listens, right? Listens
right.
to
That's
their
an interesting
stories,
point.
about like what's happened to them, which brings her to more empathy because they have a lot in common with the Lost Girl, right? They've had similar experiences, and she's got to like reorient her perspective by like burning this little hole and like giving her like another window
Mm,
into things. And to your point about Firewalk with Me, yeah, I love that idea that in some ways it even though it's the prequel, right? In some ways it
yeah.
ends with Laura achieving a kind of transcendence. And so then what are we supposed to do with these other 18 hours? And
Right.
in some ways, though, like to what I was saying kind of about the pitfalls of nostalgia or the unwillingness to kind of
Hmm.
recognize that we live inside a dream, of our own making, is for 18 hours, you're watching a lot of people who just won't let go, who can't let go, and who can't accept what's happened and are still trying to um, get back to something. Or they're just like, so you have some characters who are like that, and then there's others who are just kind of living in the wake of those things and are trying to figure out where to go next, right? That sense of being lost, or like unable to leave a room, or something like that,
Hmm.
like literally and figuratively. I think that's like, and that's where the show is really frustrating for some people, but for me, kind of radical in the way that it plays with just things playing, taking a long time to play out, right?
Yeah.
Really long scenes of like we're just being asked to sit with the way things are now. And we want them to be something else. We want them to kind of supercharge and become we want Cooper to pop up and become the Cooper we always wanted and all of that stuff. It's like, no, that's not, instead, we have to sit there and like, no, he's Dougie now, right? And like that's
Yeah.
the way things are. And we're all Dougie stumbling around trying to figure out what the hell is going on and like try to get back to some sort of spark that's gone, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but no, that's cool. I like that read a lot. Yeah.
Well, it's funny as you're saying, they're all stuck in this situation. It was reminding me of James's line in the original Twin Peaks that has become a meme because of, people's frustrations with James. But sometimes I just wish I could get on my bike and go. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, presented in Twin Peaks pretty clearly as not the answer either, because it's
Yeah.
going as escape. But it brings me
Yeah.
back to Alvin Strait, where it's like he got on his tractor and went, and it wasn't away from something, really, it was
Yeah.
towards something. So
Yeah.
that's a kind of an
Yeah.
interesting, not solution, but like kind of an answer, if you will, to the problems that are posed, I guess, in some of his work.
Yeah. Oh no, that's a great because yeah, like and what is he has to yeah, because he has to go and he has to confront the problems of his own making and that he has been running away from this entire time. And
Yeah.
then once he does that, then he is able to look up at the stars like he used to, right?
Yeah.
Like it then like he makes this repair that is not about retreating into a dream, but like, and this is where I guess like Alvin and Sailor are similar. When
Mm.
they confront the things that they're supposed to confront, then they can achieve unlock some kind of magical transcendence, right? Then they can, music can be generated out of thin air. Then you can look up at the stars like you used to. But you're not going to get access to that kind of transcendence if you don't first shovel your way out of the shit, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. The more and more I think of it, it's like Straight Story is just one of the most fascinating road
Yeah.
films of all time.
Oh,
You
hell
know,
yeah.
road trip as a sort of a non-escape, but a little bit of an
Hmm.
escape too. Like he is, stuck at home a little more and all that. So it's got that
Yeah.
element, but it takes it to such an interesting
Oh, I
place.
mean, yeah, that's the great thing about road movies is like the bait and switch that the good ones put you on. Wild at Heart does this too. It's always like, oh, or Wizard of Oz, right?
Yeah.
They're going away from something. They're going towards something and away from all the bad. It's like, no, you think you're going away, but you're going in a circle, right? You're always, you're gonna find yourself when you're there. Like you're not getting away
Yeah.
from anything.
So we're going to just pause for a moment.
Okay.
As I said, we're going to talk more in detail about a lot of these comparisons. Before we get to that, I want you to let the listeners to the public part know where they can find you, where they can follow you, where best to get
Oh
your
yeah.
book, all of that. So just
Yeah.
let them know.
Yeah, sure. So the book I would encourage you to get it from an independent bookstore. They're probably not going to have it in stock, but they'll order it for you
Hmm.
and you'll be supporting them and me, right?
Hmm.
And so or the Bloomsbury Press's website
Hmm.
is another place where you can order. And I guess if you order some of their other books, you can get free shipping, and they've got some like BFI film classics on like Blue Velvet at least, and maybe
Hmm.
another Lynch film or two. So there's a lot of stuff there that you could get. My website is mikemiley.com. And then I'm also on Blue Sky I think at Mike Miley and on Instagram at Mike C. Miley.
Perfect. So I'm going to put those links in a comment on the video. YouTube has now annoyingly taken away my ability to have active links in the show notes, but they'll
Mm.
be there as well. So you can copy and paste them if you're listening, but check out the comments if you just want to be one click away. So to carry on, I want to get into the part of Eraserhead and Firewalk with Me. And this touches on
Yeah.
something you just mentioned, the binaries, the dualities Lynch works with. You have
Hmm.
an interesting sentence in there, or interesting phrase, where you talk about oppressive binaries of the patriarchal order that are active in Eraserhead, where
Hmm.
he's seeing things as this way or that way. Now, I have some
Hmm.
thoughts on this as well, but I want to hear yours, where both in Eraserhead and in the historical text, these binaries are
Hmm.
kind of a bad thing. But
Hmm.
I think Lynch obviously plays quite a bit with his own kind of binaries and often enriches them and makes them crucial to the work. So, what do you
Hmm.
see as the distinction between the negative and the positive binaries in his viewpoint? We're going to stop the public section there. You can tune into Patreon for the answer to that question and many, many, many more, in addition to the rewards that I mentioned at the outset here. I have links in the comments, also in the show notes, but you'll have to copy them from there because, as I said, YouTube has made this much more difficult now. So you can copy and paste those or just check in the comments and click on those links for part 2 of this discussion. And also, of course, to purchase Mike's book, which is definitely, it should be clear from this conversation, very worth reading. So thank you for listening. I hope you tune in to the rest and enjoy what you hear.